Hi everyone, and welcome to day 2 of 13 days of Josh, aka my Vlogmas videos. Today, I'm going to be doing my second ever 5-star prediction list. If you have been around on my channel long enough, you will know that I've only done this one other time, and that was 2 years ago, back in 2020. I haven't done it since, partly because I had this idea that I shouldn't update this list, update this 5-star prediction until I've read all the books. Problem is I haven't read all the books. Some of them I kind of lost interest in. So I've decided I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try and update y'all at least once a year, maybe twice a year with 5-star predictions. But today what I'm going to be doing is twofold. I'm going to reflect on my first list to see how that panned out. And then I'm going to give you 5 top 5-star predictions for this list. And honestly, it was a tough list. It was some real self-reflection going on about why do I think it's going to be so good? Because I really want to get this right. I think it's a fun game to play. So without further ado, let's get into my updated 5-star prediction list. So let's start with reviewing the original list with what actually proved to be a 5-star. And of this, there were only 2 true 5 stars. The first one is Women Race and Class, and the second one was All Boys Aren't Blue. So Women Race and Class was one I just read this year, a couple months ago, within the last couple months actually. So it was a long trek to try and get this one read. And I'm really glad I did because, as I've talked about before, this book is exactly what it pretends to be. A book that is a deep yet very concise reflection of the intersection of women, race, and class in the history of America, primarily through up to like the 80s or so when this book was made. But it deals with how women have been treated, specifically Black women, throughout history up to now, and how that sort of has been ingrained in our society. This is one that I actually think works really well as a precursor to Killing the Black Body, another 5-star book that wasn't on my original prediction list, but I can't mention this one without saying, if you like this, you really should be checking out this one. I feel like it's a deeper dive into that topic, specifically in the more recent times. The other one, All Boys Aren't Blue, this is one that, honestly, I didn't remember giving it 5 stars. I thought to myself, coming into this, thinking, I didn't give this 5 stars, but I feel like it has left the impression of what a 5-star book actually is. I was like thinking to myself, I should have given it 5 stars, but then I checked and I actually did give it 5 stars. So I think what it is that I gave it 5 stars at the time, but it really has only just sort of ingrained itself deeper and deeper into my mind, I guess. And I've talked about it or hinted at it in my November wrap-up, where I talked about George M. Johnson's newest memoir, and about the impact this book has had on me. I've been reading a lot, or I say a lot, several works, both fiction and nonfiction, that deal with being trans, non-binary, and just gender identity. And I feel like this book in particular had a really lasting impression on getting me to reflect on my own gender identity in a way that I have in my personal life, but obviously only now getting to where I'm acknowledging it, let alone really discussing it deeply on my channel, because it's such a personal conversation. But it is something that, for that reason, has such a massive impact on my own personal journey. And there was so much about this book that felt like a mirror, as rather than just a window into George M. Johnson's own personal life. Now, the 4.5 stars, basically books that were just barely away from being a 5-star, but let's be honest, I think it's close enough. I consider 4.5 sort of a win. And those are 2 books. And I think I gave 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 total. So that's half of my predictions, 50%, ended up being effectively 5 stars. But these 2 are going to be The Deep and The Vanishing Half. The Vanishing Half, I remember really liking at the time. The story about these 2 light skin or white passing, I believe, women. Basically, I think get separated at birth or something. I'm not entirely sure. A lot of it's left me. I probably should reread it. It follows them as they go in 2 different paths. Actually, they weren't separated. Maybe it was just that as they grew up, they decided to pursue different types of life. One where they embrace their identity as a black woman. The other one where they surround themselves with whiteness. I guess the best way I can think of it is they try to get off with passing. It was a really fascinating dissection of that. I still haven't read the book that I think often is considered sort of true for like the quintessential approach of this type of analysis of white passing, which is the book called Passing. Nevertheless, this was one that made a really lasting impression. I don't know why it can be 5 stars. Oftentimes, the difference between a 4.5 and a 5 star is purely like a gut instinct. For whatever reason, this didn't quite get there. The same with The Deep, which is a novella by River Solomon, which basically was a mermaid story that had to deal with, I guess, generational trauma and how certain people are given the responsibility to sort of hold on to that entire generation of trauma and trying to reckon with that and understand their own personal responsibility and to what extent, at what point they can sort of free themselves of that. I feel like it's one that I really liked, not just because of the narrative, the idea, the themes that it was trying to dissect, but also just as a work of fantasy / science fiction. I really love the crafting of this tale of how these mermaids effectively, they aren't quite mermaids, but they're effectively that, got created, how that sort of all intersects with American history and the black identity, black history in a way that just worked really well for me. And again, no real reason why I didn't quite reach 5 stars. I think maybe that was just more to do with the story structure. I think it worked really well as a work of speculative fiction, but maybe it just didn't quite reach the highs of what I would consider as a perfect narrative storytelling. Again, I'm reflecting on a book that I read, was it January of this year? It might have been January of last year. I don't remember. It's been a year or two. Next up is the 2 that I got wrong. First one being Wild Beauty by Anna Marie McLemore and Ring Shout by, I forget his name. Anyways, let's see. I think between the 2, Ring Shout was better. It was a story that basically uses speculative horror fiction as a way to dissect the Jim Crow era and the extreme bigotry and hatred that was being festered in that time. And it was a fascinating use of speculative fiction to dissect that in the same way that Deep was. But there was something about this, and maybe it was the storytelling, maybe it was the storytelling intersecting with what I think was a very poor audio narration, that just made it really difficult for me to get immersed in the story. There was like a level of attachment where it just didn't quite feel real for whatever reason. It was just something about it that didn't quite latch itself in a way that I thought it would. And I don't know why, other than probably just the writing style wasn't quite meshing with me. And I think it was exacerbated by the narrator, who again, I think did a really poor job. And then Wild Beauty, this was I think the 3rd or 4th book I read by Anna Marie McLemore, and I've loved their work so much. But for some reason, this one just didn't quite click. I think partly because I feel like it's sort of getting old. I'm not sure if there is enough newness for me to really get into it. But this is one of those authors who's, I think, like George M. Johnson, has helped. I guess I appreciated seeing the dissection of gender and gender identity in their work. So either way, I still love their work. Actually, I don't think I've read a single one of the books since this one, partly because of the disappointment that came from this one. And then finally, the 2 unread. Girl, Woman, Other, and Skeleton Crew. Both books I want to read, but for some reason I just haven't. King is one that I usually only read Stephen King when I'm like either in a slog or like I'm just like I get really motivated for whatever reason just to pick up one of his books. There's a few times this year that I did that. So I guess the problem is that I find it difficult to pick up his books when I have so many other horror books I want to read, because I spend so much of my time just, reading Stephen King my entire life. I'm just really hesitant to pick up his works, and when I do, it's usually just sort of on a whim. So it's the thing with Skeleton Crew is just one of those that I just haven't had that whim yet. And I do want to read it. I really do. And I just heard good things. But to be honest, I probably wouldn't put it on a 5-star prediction list again because I really don't know much about it. I just heard it's one of his best short story collections. And then the other one would be Girl, Woman, Other. This is one that I think I really like. I'm really interested in this sort of what it's presenting us with, which I believe is that I don't actually remember much about it. So it's like I think looking at I don't know. For me, the deepest I can get into is what the title implies. That's all I remember from it. But I do think I was wrong to put it on here. I think I was being a little ambitious with what I was hoping to be a 5 stars, but in reality, literary fiction rarely is 5 stars unless it has more than just literary going for it, which is why I'd say I've been slow to pick it up, just because I think it'll be I assume it'll be a more difficult read than an easy, quick read. That's that. Now, moving on to my 5 predictions here. The 5 books that I've put on here is my top 5 5-star predictions. Now, I started with 3 books that are all series that I've loved up to now, and I realized that I'm not going to waste my entire thing here when I actually have a video planned to talk about my series update. So instead, I decided to focus on the one book of all the series that I'm reading that have new books coming out that I think I am most likely to really love and give a full 5-star to. And for this, I went with Shauna McGuire's newest Wayward Children series book coming out, Lost in the Moment and Found. And part of the reason I think I like this the most isn't just because I love the portal fantasy, I love this series, but because it is apparently a standalone where it is, I think, diverging from the Wayward Children's school, at least for the most part, and is instead dealing with this girl, I think, who finds this doorways to different portals, like a different world, like an entire suite of doors. I don't know exactly how it's going to go with that, but I do know I love Portal Fantasy, and I love the idea of delving into multiple worlds. I love the idea of a standalone. I think it has everything going for it to make it the perfect book for me, or a perfect book for me. So, which is why I think it's absolutely going to be a 5-star. This is probably one of my most confident selections here. My next two are going to be books that aren't books I guess I consider like the highest priority on my biggest, oh, I want to read this so bad list, even though I do want to read them. But I think what I decided to do here is I wanted to include a couple authors who I now read several books from, but also who have every single time given me a 5-star read. And for this, I first chose James Baldwin, someone who I've always loved his works, even if it wasn't a firm 5 stars, although I look back on the ones that I've read, and I'm pretty sure I've always given 5 stars. So I picked the one that was seen very popular, but also one that I've actually already bought the audiobook for, that is If Beale Street Could Talk. I don't know much about this. This one I chose purely because James Baldwin has always been a win for me. I'm now making this bet that I'm going to get a 5-star again from him, especially when it's one of his most popular works. Up to now, I've been reading more obscure. I guess I did read like the Giovanni's Room, but then the other ones were, I think, more obscure. They still hit really hard. So I can only imagine what his biggest works will provide me. And then next up will actually be an author I haven't read in a while, and I need to reread their works, but Celeste Ng's newest work, Our Missing Hearts, which I think I heard was a dystopian work somehow. I don't know much about it. This is, again, a book that I decided to put on here strictly because up to now, both of her other works have been 5 stars. I think it's a safe bet. Again, I read her works across the course of several years, so I think it's a bit riskier than James Baldwin, who I've read several books in the last year or two. My reading has definitely changed in the last several years, so whether or not she'll still be a 5-star, I guess we will see. It's a risky bet, but it's one I'm willing to make. Next up, I wanted to pick one from Nick Alley. I actually had two I was really pulling between. I wasn't sure which one I wanted to go with. They're both new releases coming out in 2023. They're both horror, paranormal, fantasy. I really, really wanted, I almost put both of them on here. Ultimately, I was trying to limit just to one. And the one I ended up choosing was when I was reviewing the Goodreads reviews of the arcs that have already been read. I chose the one that seemed to be more fast-paced. Also the one that seemed to talk about being more inherently dark and terrifying and unnerving, because that's what I want to feel the extremeness. I don't want just a gothic feeling. I want to feel it in my bones. And that's the one I decided to go with, which is Our Share of Night by Mariana Enriquez. And this is a 700 or 800 page book. It's actually a translation, so it's technically already out. And it is, dealing during, I think, the Argentina Civil War, some type of war that was going on at that time, so jumping between times. But apparently it deals with a father who I think is psychic or something like that nature, and his son who is now being seen as a way to sort of take over his role in this community. And the community itself seems to be rooted in maybe some demonic underpinnings, as well as some culture stuff going on. And again, like I said, the reviews seem to imply that it's fast-paced and it gets really dark and horrifying. And that is what I'm hoping for. I'm taking a risk here because I don't like it. I don't like giving a 5-star prediction for an author I've never read, but I'm being hopeful here. This is my risque selection option. And then finally, my last option, I wanted to pick one nonfiction, and I wanted it to be sort of out there, a book that I think, one that I really want to read, and one that I think will satisfy certain interest of mine, I should say. And the one I went with here was Lady Bird Johnson, Hiding in Plain Sight by Julia Swig. And I chose this one because it was one I put on my TBR after asking directly Susan Page books that she would recommend that take similar looks at important women in history, similar to the books she's written. And if you don't know, she's written 2 books I really liked, which was Madam Speaker about Nancy Pelosi and The Matriarch about Barbara Bush, the First Lady. And she recommended this one. She thought it was underrated and wasn't getting a lot of attention. And she thought it would be a book that would satisfy readers who enjoyed her works. And I absolutely have enjoyed her works, which is why I think this would be a really good read. I love politics. I love reading about important women in history and women that are often overlooked. And I think that is what this is going to be. And based off another reason why I chose this was because this is sort of a TBR of sorts. I'm not saying I'm going to do a vlog. Who knows? Maybe I will. But I think this will motivate me to pick it up sooner, which is something I really want. Hence me choosing this one. In any case, I am really excited for all 5 of these books, and I'm really hoping I don't lose that excitement, kind of like I did in my last list, which is part of why I made it shorter. I didn't want to sort of overwhelm myself with all these books I felt like I had to read. But I'm hoping the next 6 months or so I'll have these read. And in fact, I may actually end up doing a vlog with a few of them. Probably not Lost in a Moment, because I'm going to read that one as soon as it comes out for sure in January. But the rest, I may do that. For now, though, I hope you enjoyed this list. Let me know your thoughts, both on, I guess, where I landed with my last 5-star prediction list, but also on the books I have coming up. And for now, I hope you all have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow on my next day of 13 days of Joshmas. I don't fucking know. Have a great day. Bye-bye.